Donald Trump is reportedly putting massive pressure on Zelensky to accept a U.S.-drawn peace plan in Ukraine, and now Ukrainian neocons are freaking out. When have we ever seen a country that is painted as a victim of war try to prevent peace at all costs? This comes as the Ukrainian front lines has completely collapsed, and you have Ukrainian men that are fleeing the country en masse, and the Zelensky regime has been rocked with corruption scandals. It is over. This is exactly why Donald Trump drew up his 28-point plan, which includes Ukraine conceding territory which Russia already holds, and Ukraine also shrinking their military by half and restoring the Russian language as the official language of Ukraine after the Zelensky regime banned it. It also includes United States and Western acknowledgement of Crimea being part of Russia. Considering the fact that the people of Crimea and the Donbass do not want to be part of the fascist Ukrainian regime, this peace deal makes 100% sense to me. Meanwhile, Ukrainian neocons are completely freaking out. European and Ukrainian neocons are already all over the media complaining about this deal, saying that it's complete capitulation. Well, you guys lost the war. What do you guys expect? Ukraine would have been in a much better position if they simply accepted the peace deals offered by Russia in 2022 that the United States and UK purposely tanked. The reality of the situation is the Ukraine proxy war has been horrific for NATO and the West. We will be much better off working in cooperation with Russia instead of engaging in endless war.
What's poppin'? My friends, my family, we got a special edition for you guys today. We got a Sunday morning edition for you. You guys know we have esteemed guest Joti Brar who will be joining us today, taking us to school. But before I bring Joti in, this is the big news that rocked American politics, where essentially Marjorie Taylor Greene, she told her supporters that things are worse than anyone could ever possibly imagine. And after being in the system for 5 years, she realized that there's no way to change the system and that she's a broken woman. So sorry guys, you're on your own. Thanks for the lifetime pension, my friend. I've been calling out Marjorie Taylor Greene as not being a real fighter forever, right? I've been laughing at the people falling for the psyop. How are Marjorie Taylor Greene supporters not furious at her for this? Isn't Thomas Massie supposed to be your boy? And you quit on him? You quit on Thomas Massie and your supporters? And then there are a lot of cope excuses where people say, well, don't you know that Marjorie Taylor Greene, she getting death threats? Well, every single member of Congress received death threats. And I received death threats. Is that why you stopped fighting? Do you think socialists around the world, and Joti would know about this as well, do you guys think socialists stop fighting because their life is in danger? And by the way, that is a conspiracy theory with no evidence, by the way. If your life is in danger and you worried about rogue gunmen like you was mentioning, why would you leave Congress when Congress has the best security in the world? If you're worried about political violence, wouldn't it be better to stay in Congress where these people are completely isolated from the world? Now you have the same right-wing Trumpers who are going to be threatening your life. Now you don't have the security detail. Do you guys think the Israelis forgive? They don't forgive. They don't forget. The idea that she's safer outside of Congress, absurd. I need you guys to acknowledge and realize that Marjorie Taylor Greene quit on you. She don't give a damn about you. She's a capitalist. And I've seen people engaging in political theater, pretending that this millionaire wine mom is fighting for the American people. Are you guys serious right now? Looking at some people I like, who I see going through this political theater. And there was all this cope. I'm going to bring Joti in too. Joti, I'm very interested in your thoughts on a lot of these current events. We have Joti who will be joining us very soon. And I called Marjorie Taylor Greene out because, bro, the timeline was unbearable. At least to me, because you gotta know, I hate the political theater. I hate the celebrity worship, and I hate the duopoly nonsense. To me, this is just duopoly nonsense. And then the copium from her supporters after they realized that she took the federal pension and left. Because isn't it interesting that she decided to leave right when she became viable for the federal pension? So then people are like, don't you know that Marjorie Taylor Greene is setting herself up for a presidential run? Don't you know that she actually she's playing fighting chess? She has no plans for you. She quit. Like, this is one of the excuses that people made. Look. And in time ran with it. Marjorie Taylor Greene privately told allies that she is considering running for president in 2028. So then when this came out, all the Marjorie fans, bro, the copium was palpable. And they were like, yeah, see, this is why Marjorie has a plan. No, she doesn't. Then she immediately came out like, no. No, I'm not going to do none of that. She explains how it would be hard. It would be hard to do that. But I do find it interesting because she went and complained. This is what she said in her exit rant. Are you happy that Social Security won't be able to pay full benefits starting in 2033? Are you happy that 38 trillion in debt and the fact that it will only I think I'm supposed to say, are you happy that we are 38 trillion in debt and the fact they will only get drastically higher? Are you happy that Democrats created our healthcare crisis? Only one party, guys. With Obamacare and tax credits, and Republicans refuse to fix it. Are you happy about paying taxes on literally everything and being one of the highest taxed people on earth? Are you worried about we might be invaded one day? What are you talking about? And all these problems that she is mentioning, this is why we engage in scientific socialism, to solve all these class issues that are affecting your poor white constituents. Marjorie Taylor Greene hasn't done anything to improve the quality of life for people of Georgia. Name one thing that she has done to improve anyone's life. Not a damn thing. She spent millions of her own money propping up a genocidal billionaire. And people pretend that she's some sort of populist. As far as I'm concerned, good riddance. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene is worried about her safety. But isn't it interesting that Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't interested about the safety of the Venezuelan fishermen that Donald Trump was murdering? So as everyone was desperate looking for a new political hero, here's Marjorie Taylor Greene endorsing Donald Trump's blatant violation of international law. When this in the response to the video where Trump said we're just gonna kill them, it's a short clip.
I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay, we're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene supports that. So isn't it interesting that she's concerned about safety for herself, but not safety for our fellow brothers and sisters in the global South? But anyway, I won't bring in Jody. That's my take on Marjorie. I think it's hilarious, and I that's our job at RBN. That's my job, is to redirect the focus, because I see the ruling class consistently. They are obsessed with distracting the working class with useless political theater. We got to get people focused, and we got to get them. They have to understand who their true enemy is. They had to realize who has their back and who don't have their back. And I want to show you guys. This is the last thing I should do. Want to show you guys, because I know we was posting about this. As Marjorie Taylor Greene is quitting on you guys, she made a fortune in Congress. Look, she's like, thanks for the fortune, guys. She was like worth around $900,000 before she got in Congress. Then she invested in Palantir. And then she was one of the most prolific inside traders of all time. Took a $900,000 net worth, and now she's worth $28 million. So she got that Nancy Pelosi level financial ability that she didn't tap into this financial ability until she got into Congress. Isn't that interesting? This is the person that people are trying to portray as your class friends. All right, let me bring my guests in. Sorry, I just want to quickly touch on that. I want to bring in prominent organizer, scientific socialist, educator, writer. Thank you for joining us, Joti Brar on RBN. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Nick. I'm great. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I want to hear your thoughts on, because I've been fighting the DSA left, who's been obsessed with dragging people back into the Democratic Party. You had this big victory with Zohran Mamdani, and this is just another example of how Americans, they just love their political theater. We show you guys the cringe tweet from Ryan Grimm gushing over the Trump-Mamdani meeting. I don't know if you had a chance to see the meeting between Trump and Mamdani. It was a spectacle in the States here. But just to get a story, I want to get your vague thoughts on the strategy of supporting someone like Zohran Mamdani, who was making these backroom deals. Because Trump was very nice to him, and apparently Mamdani said a lot of things that Trump likes. So the DSA strategy is to elect Nepo babies to position of office and then have them engage in backroom deals with the capitalist class, and we're supposed to trust the plan. So Joti, thank you for joining us once again. I want to get your thoughts on the current state of the left and whether the DSA is correct in supporting someone like Zohran Mamdani. What are your thoughts, Joti? Thanks for joining once again.
Thanks, Nick. Well, to be honest with you, I think anybody who puts their faith in the DSA at this point in time is frankly somewhat lunatic. It seems pretty delusional after all of the people that the DSA have formally asked you to put your faith in, and the role that they have consistently played in propping up the Democrat Party, as more and more workers are becoming disillusioned and realizing that there's a duopoly and that left and right, Republican, Democrat, makes no difference inside this, kind of, as you said, political theater. What role do the self-identifying socialists, the democratic socialists they call themselves, of America, what role do they play? They run after workers who are realizing that the system can't be made to serve their interests and try to bring them back, right? That's the job that they're playing. So can I just check our signals okay? Yeah,
I think I can hear you. Chat, is everything, do everyone hear Joti? Correct. You sound good to me. It sounds perfectly fine to me. I want to get your reaction as well, since we're speaking about the DSA. So as they have this strategy where they plan on shifting the Democratic Party to the left, which has been a complete failure. The only thing they achieved by their entryism strategy is that they received a whole lot of genocide that their party supported, that their party voted against resolutions condemning socialism. I'm not sure if you've seen this. Let me show. I'll put this one up first. The House passes a resolution condemning socialism.
Yeah.
After a high number of profile Democrats vote in support of the measure, including Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries, who Zohran Mamdani is actively protecting from primary challenges from his own DSA members. So do you see this, Joti?
Yeah, it's classic. And to be honest with you, we see exactly the same thing in Britain. We've had this decades-long campaign by all kinds of self-identifying socialists, most of whom are not well, of course, they're all not socialists, but they're either revisionist communists or they're Trotskyites. And Trotskyism, we've got books on Trotskyism from our party, so you can read all about it. But basically, it's a psychological operation, right? It's a misdirection. It's people, leaders who identify themselves as socialists and then lead the people who follow them, up a blind alley and keep them busy doing nothing that's going to harm the status quo, keep them away from genuine revolutionary socialist activity. And let's just kind of rewind a little bit. This concept of democratic socialism, the whole purpose of it is to differentiate you as a respectable socialist from those non-respectable socialists, i.e. scientific socialists, i.e. communists, right? The difference between people who call themselves socialist and communist in the West, what it means is the people who call themselves communists are the ones who are fighting for system change, which will be socialism to start with, but will eventually lead to communism, right? The people who call themselves socialists, they're not trying to change the system. They are trying to persuade working people that there's such a thing as kinder capitalism, right? Kind capitalism, capitalism with kinder characteristics, gentler capitalism. What they actually mean is a bigger share of the imperialist super profits for the working class in the West. And we'll accept all of your looting and genociding abroad. The vote you talked about just now is a perfect example that Zohran Mamdani is propping up, one of these guys who's voting against socialism, right? It's the circle we see endlessly with this type of dead-end politics. But the whole real aim of the Western socialist movements, as opposed to genuine communist movement, is to keep workers campaigning for a version of imperialist capitalism that treats them a little bit better. And the deal that they want to strike is, if you give me a better house and better wages, it's fine. I don't care how you got that money. And if it means you've got to double down on looting and genociding all over the rest of the world, I'll turn a blind eye to that, right? That's the deal that the socialists, so-called self-identifying in the imperialist countries, that's the deal they're asking for, basically. The reality is what they want is back to 1945. It's not coming back, right? Those conditions are gone. The real choice for the working people is not 1945 or socialism, it's barbarism or socialism. It's 1929, 1933, or, you know, a future of socialism. You've got to recognize that as a worker. I think the one thing, just coming back to your thing about Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think the one thing that we can be grateful for her for pointing out, and that, you know, socialist America should be picking up on, is that she pinpointed one true thing. You can't change the system from within for the benefit of the workers. Now, I'm not saying that's what she tried to do, but she made that statement, and that's useful.
Yeah, I 100% understand what you're saying there. And I want you to expound on this a little bit more, because you mentioned Trotskyism, and that's something it's what we mentioned on our channel many times before. You guys read a lot of books. How will you define the biggest difference between someone who is more of a trot versus someone who is more like me? I'm more of a tanky, like I'm tanky as fuck. I don't apologize for it. So what do you think has been one of the biggest flaws of people who follow Trotskyist ideology, Joti?
Fundamentally, Trotskyism as an ideology is incoherent. If you look at it throughout Trotsky's lifetime and his various positions, they contradict one another. What is consistent about them is opposition to Lenin. And over time, what transpired was, from a certain point, and it's debatable how early on in his career this was true, but certainly after the revolution, it became clear at a certain point that Trotsky was actually in league with and being funded by and backed by imperialists to act as a saboteur and to demoralize workers and try to build an internal opposition, right? But if you look at the fundamental characteristics of Trotskyist movements, number one, they're always rooted in petty bourgeois and labor aristocratic populations, basically in imperialist countries. Their propaganda usually amplifies imperialist propaganda, but wraps it up in revolutionary phrasing. So they don't recognize, Trotsky didn't recognize, and Trotskyists don't recognize Lenin's thesis on imperialism. They don't recognize the revolutionary potential of bourgeois national liberation movements in the oppressed worlds. They say, oh, it's bourgeois, we can't be with that. So they denounce the leadership of many, many national liberation struggles, which are fighting imperialism. So they end up helping the imperialists, right? But they wrap it up. They wrap up their denunciations in revolutionary phrasing. That's the dangerous aspect of Trotskyism, is that their counter-revolutionary nature is hidden behind a lot of words about Lenin and Bolshevism, right? So they also don't recognize the revolutionary potential of poor peasants all over the world. They didn't in Russia, and they don't still today. They don't recognize what Lenin pinpointed as super important in the imperialist countries, the split in the working class. So all the way back to 1914, 15, 16, Lenin was working really hard to identify What is the reason that all the socialist parties in World War I in Europe were selling out during that war and siding with their own ruling classes? And he pinpointed how imperialism had warped the economies and enabled the ruling classes to buy off the top layer of workers and give them good conditions and pay and make them loyal to the system. And he pointed out that the leadership of the trade union and working class movements in all the imperialist countries had been co-opted this way. They'd been given nice careers and good, kind of conditions of life, and it had made them loyal to the system. And these are the people that the Trotskyists really work amongst and appeal to. But the Trotskyists themselves don't recognize that this is an economic fact. They identify, everybody who's working class as the same and don't see the difference. And then abroad, people who are very revolutionary but not from a proletarian background, they will denounce them and say that they can't be revolutionary. So the end result is they end up always siding with imperialism, even though they wrap it up in revolutionary sounding phrases. And one of the ways you can spot a Trotskyist today is their absolute vitriolic hatred for Joseph Stalin. And of course, the reason that there's so much hatred for Joseph Stalin is because he represents the most successful and first and most important building of a socialist country, right? Marxism was implemented in a brilliant way during the Lenin-Stalin period of the Soviet Union in every field. And the achievements of Soviet socialism, of course, sent the ruling classes all over the world absolutely reeling and made them kind of frenzied in their anti-communism. And, Trotskyism represents that. Trotsky endlessly created propaganda all the way from the death of Lenin until the death of Trotsky. Trotsky's main propaganda plank was attacking the leadership of the Bolshevik Party, attacking the building of socialism, trying to undermine the confidence of the workers inside the Soviet Union and the confidence of the workers outside the Soviet Union in what was happening. And he was endlessly predicting how it was all about to fall, how another revolution was needed. If you look at what happened in 1991, when the counter-revolution finally succeeded in the Soviet Union, Trotskyist organizations all over the world hailed it as the revolution Trotsky had said was needed to fix socialism.
Jesus Christ. That was an amazing breakdown. I'm glad you really dived into that, because I've seen the Western left in the United States infected. I'm sure it's bad in the UK as well, but the United States is infected with this style of thinking, and also like this anarchist style of thinking. And I've clashed with these people. Like, there were many people who like my politics, but then I'll get around with them. I'll be like, man, I can tell you're a Trotskyite. I can tell that you are falling for these empire talking points. What you mentioned earlier, they are the ones who usually legitimize the empire talking points. Like in terms of like views and clicks and clout, I would have been much better off if I would have kept up with the Dr. Cornel West style left. Because remember, Dr. Cornel West, he used to come on RBN all the time, but he had this tendency to always condemn Russia, always condemn China. And what the breaking point is where he started praising Alexei Navalny as a freedom fighter. You guys remember that? Yep. You guys see how these patterns develop? Go ahead, Jolie. Feel free to interrupt me now. Feel free. You got anything you want to add?
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
Yeah, it's all good.
The guy is a fascist, right? And they're holding him up as a revolutionary, liberation fighter against the awful Russians. And that is a classic example of, as you said, Trotskyists amplifying imperialist propaganda and doing it in a way where they wrap it up with what sounds like Leninist type of phrasing to fool people into thinking that this is a progressive politics. And of course, one of the other ways you can tell that Trotskyism is essentially a Trojan horse, a psychological operation in the modern terms, right? It's been a century-long psychological operation in our movement. And one of the ways you can tell that is Trotskyist leaders and Trotskyist organizations are always being mentioned in our ruling class press. They get promoted to the workers. They get promoted by the algorithms. People like us do not, Right? There's no BBC show that will ever invite me on. Not only the BBC, but the whole mainstream media won't invite me or anyone from my party, won't mention the name of our organization, but they will constantly promote. Even if they do it in a negative way, they know damn well that's promotion. They're putting the name of the party and its leaders in the minds of the people, and they do the exact opposite with us. We have blanket silence.
That's why you guys see Dr. Cornel West on CNN. And Dr. Cornel West called it the Jimmy Dore left. Only because we had a criticism of his take of Alexei Navalny, where he was trying to prop up this neo-Nazi fascist who was siding with the CIA to overthrow his country. Like, there was confirmed leaked audio where he was working with a British MI6 and was receiving payments of millions of dollars in order to destabilize Russia. And people like Dr. Cornel West was defending him. And I view that as a massive red flag, which led to one of our fallouts. Then you have Bush Ware, someone who seemed like a good guy, but he repeats the CIA talking point nonsense about the Uyghur genocide in China. Can you imagine your government funding a real genocide that we all see, but you spend your time fear-mongering and spreading lies about their number one chief rival and trying to compare the two? Like, yeah, I know we live under an evil empire too, but don't you know China is committing genocide too, just like Gaza. You guys see they make that false equivalency? Yeah. They're also the same people who will condemn Venezuela and Russia. Speaking of Zohran Mamdani threw Venezuela and Cuba under the bus and called them authoritarian regimes, which is why he was allowed to win his office of mayorship.
Exactly.
And this is what I fundamentally disagree on. It's not a small disagreement. A lot of people think, like, man, Nick, why are you always going after Zohran? Why are you always going after the people when you agree with 90% of what they say? Like, fam, it's a fundamentally different belief system where I'm not going to advocate for receiving the spoils of imperialism like they do. I don't want the spoils of imperialism. I want to dismantle the imperialist structure. Jody, you have anything you want to add to that thought? Like Zohran condemning Venezuela and China. Why are they doing that? Jody, anything else you want to add?
I think you pinpointed it perfectly there, Nick. But I would say when you hear a politician do that, it should be an absolute red flag. It's not like like you say, it's not like a small policy difference. They are signaling to the ruling class their respectability, the fact that they are never going to do anything to try to mobilize the working class to undermine the status quo and dismantle the system and dislodge the financial elites, right? They are auditioning, essentially, to be allowed to have this job in the political circus, which is, you're right. You pinpointed that earlier. That's exactly what it is. It's a distraction mechanism. The Congress is not where decisions are really made. It's the rubber stamping machine, and it's filled with yes men and women who understand what their role is. And the news cycle that's made to keep us all so busy is full of fabricated controversies between, people who essentially are all on the same side. And they all work for the same system. And the ruling class taking the decisions and deciding what really goes on are not the people in Congress or in the Senate. They're not the people in Parliament or the House of Lords. They are the people, the people who own the banks and the big corporations. And they have created a whole machinery of policy making and policy implementation. And, laws that they need implemented are drafted elsewhere, and they're passed through Parliament or Congress to be rubber stamped by people who know what their job is, essentially. And, odd bits of controversy or differences, apparent differences between them. It's all a lot of show and distraction to keep people busy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's extremely very well said. And you're teaching me a lot just about this conversation, Joy. That's why it's always great to have you on. I want to vaguely ask you what a lot of people in the West get wrong about Stalin, because I hear that a lot all the time. To me personally, my descent into becoming a full-fledged Marxist-Leninism came from reading the Black Panthers, and they describe why Marxist-Leninism is the path forward to Black liberation. And I've seen the relationship that the Black Panthers and many Black liberation fighters had with the USSR, who also supported liberation movements all around the world. So I got into communism following the Black radical tradition, with the acknowledgement that there's been this solidarity between Russians and Black Americans for decades. But I will admit there's gaps in knowledge when it comes to like the entire history of Stalin. I'm not like a expert Stalinist, you know what I mean? So whenever I hear like these Westerners bring up this shit about Stalin, like how he was like an imperialist, how he was evil, I'm like, I wish I was equipped to debunk that. I'm not like an expert on this motherfucker. But Jody, I want to learn from you. Like, how do you respond to these people who say that we can't follow the tradition of someone like Stalin because he was a bloody murderer, he was imperialist? Because these are the things I hear. How do you tend to respond to these things?
The first thing that I say to somebody who says those things, who genuinely believes those things and isn't just a state provocateur or a troller or whatever.
I hear it all the time. I hear it on left Twitter. I know you don't pay attention to stuff. On left Twitter is dominant, where people always denouncing Stalin. I'm like, what? To me, it's absurd. But what's your thoughts on that, and how do you tend to address that?
I think the first thing to say is you've been lied to. People know they've been lied to about so many things, and yet they still accept all the anti-communist propaganda they've been drilled with from birth, as if everybody knows, like everybody knows the world is round, except apparently lots of people today don't think that's true either. But, like everybody knows we breathe oxygen from the air, right? It's that type of like everybody knows. Yes, your commenter there who says there's good books from Grover Furr. My father wrote an excellent book called Trotskyism or Leninism. Ludo Martins wrote a brilliant book called Another View of Stalin. For American audience coming from your perspective, who come into the movement via a kind of, wanting to understand how to solve the Black liberation question in the USA, one of the really good sources I would recommend is Harry Haywood's autobiography. He was a Black American communist during the 1930s, and his autobiography is lovely. It's a long time since I read it, so I won't try and recite any details from it. Paul Robeson's little autobiography, he talks about the Soviet Union and why he's a friend of the Soviet Union. I always love, it always sticks with me, Paul Robeson's description of his first visit to the USSR. And what he said was, it was the first time in my life I felt like a man and not like a black man.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and that, of course, was during the Stalin era. And he sent his son to school in the Soviet Union because he wanted him to grow up feeling like a human being and not like a black boy in the United States of America of that time. So Paul Robeson's little book, Here I Stand, is a wonderful description of the life of an oppressed black man in the USA, and a description of why he identified with the USSR and wouldn't denounce it during the whole McCarthy era. Presumably you know about Paul Robeson and how he was persecuted, and how they, although he was this incredible and much loved international artist, the McCarthy government took away his passport and wouldn't let him travel. And he would do concerts down the phone to people because he couldn't travel anymore. But anyway, he was a phenomenal character. So I would recommend those as kind of little places to start, to introduce you from that perspective to the USSR, from the question of national liberation and anti-racism. The USSR during the period of socialist construction, which was the period of Lenin and then Stalin, from the end of the Civil War up until the death of Stalin was 1953. There's lots of amazing books that will help you to see the difference between what you've been told and what was actually happening. A couple of them I really recommend. There's one by they called him the Red Dean, because he was a dean in Canterbury Cathedral, right, in the 1930s, who traveled to the Soviet Union, and he wrote a book called, his name was Hewlett Johnson, and he wrote a book called The Socialist Sixth of the World, which is a very nice introduction to what was going on in the Soviet Union. Another author who's brilliant, who was an American journalist, was Anna Louise Strong, All her books are wonderful, but the Stalin era is a really nice one. Now, the only caveat I have with that book is it was written after he died. And because Khrushchev had introduced this anti-Stalin campaign, which had really knocked the communist movement kind of for six and left a lot of people very confused, the initial response of a lot of communists was to assume that Khrushchev was telling the truth about Stalin, and nevertheless to say, well, okay, he must have made some mistakes, but he did really good things, and here's some. So the framing of Anna Louise Strong book is like, oh, well, we've just heard all this shocking news that Stalin did some bad things, but nevertheless, these are all the things I saw in the Soviet Union during that period, and it's all amazing, right? Yes, that Dominic Lacerda book is also really good. But what was I going to say? Yeah, the reality is actually one of the most important things for people to understand is that Khrushchev's secret speech, so-called, it was secret from the Soviet population, but broadcast around the world, right? This was a massive, massive coup for the imperialists. It demobilized half the world's communist movement. It made people so demoralized because the Soviet Union that they'd looked up to under the leadership of Joseph Stalin through that whole period suddenly was being defamed. It was, we were being told that the leader that we had all admired and respected had been so terrible. And it really upset a lot of people, of course, demoralized a lot of people, of course. Khrushchev's speech, now Grover Furr's written a wonderful book where he went through the Soviet archives to see each point in Khrushchev's speech, was there any truth to it? And I did an interview with him at the time he put out this book. It's called Khrushchev Lied. And I said to him, what was that like, going through the archive? And he said to me, it was really almost shocking, because what I found was every single point in that speech was a lie. I think there's 50 some.
Interesting.
And he said it would have been much better for me as a writer and a publisher if I could have found 3 or 4 of them were true, right? It would have looked better, because now it looks like I'm just a pro-Stalin propagandist. Because I said, no, it's all lies. But what I think is really important is what Khrushchev did in that speech was resuscitate Trotsky's lies. It was a set of lies that Trotsky had been saying all the way through Stalin's lifetime, and they'd all been debunked and everybody knew it was nonsense. And then because it was coming from someone who was the leader of the Soviet Union, not this, exposed fraud Trotsky, then it really had carried a lot of weight, a lot of credence. And this has been the basis for everybody knows Stalin was a bad man, because, Khrushchev himself, Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union after Stalin died, and the leader of the Communist Party after Stalin died, and the person who was overseeing the beginning of the reversing of a lot of socialist economics and politics inside the Soviet Union, began during that era. That was the beginning of the process that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? Came under Khrushchev. So, it's a complex picture, Nick, but the reality is that people have been totally lied to. And the thing is, if you really want to know, there's so much fantastic information out there. There's a whole load. I've got a shelf full of wonderful books here that come from the Soviet Union during the Stalin era, in the English language, eyewitnesses from Britain, from America, from all over the world, describing what they saw there. It speaks for itself. It speaks volumes. And the other thing you can do, to be honest, is read Stalin himself. Stalin has been vilified to you in so many, 1,000 different ways. But when you hear his voice, when you see how calm he is, how skilled he is, how measured and how insightful, what a brilliant theoretician he is, and what a gift he has for breaking down really complex political, philosophical ideas, economic ideas in simple ways without dumbing it down. It's an incredible skill. You have to be very, very skillful and knowledgeable yourself to be able to explain complex things in simple ways. And Stalin was a master at that. And his books are the best introduction to Marxism for anybody, because he was writing for ordinary people, and it really shines through. So the best way really to rebut and undo some of your anti-Stalin programming is to read some Stalin.
Yeah, that was a fantastic breakdown. Once again, you're teaching me a lot of things. The biggest thing I know is that Russia was a broken, humiliated state before Lenin and Stalin. And Stalin took this country that was considered a joke and turned it into a powerhouse that we know that the Soviet Union as today. And the reforms that Stalin implemented and the policies that benefited the working class that they implemented, you can still see throughout Russia today. That's why Russia has a more thriving working class than the Americans do. They have paid maternity leave. They have universal health care. They have things that we couldn't dream of having in the United States. Like their left actually accomplished stuff for the working class, which is why I find it extremely uncouth when I see failed leftists, failed pretend socialists like Bernie Sanders, who has a ton of gray hairs, been doing this fight for decades. He's been advocating for single-payer healthcare for decades, Jody. Like there's speeches from him from the 1980s, him advocating for this. And what annoys me is these people never self-examine. Like, why have your strategy failed for the last few decades, Bernie? So as Bernie condemns Putin in Russia, as Dr. Cornel West and the professional managerial class condemn Russia, they accomplish they give for their working class healthcare and the same benefits that you guys failed to accomplish in the United States. So who are you to judge? And something else that people don't acknowledge enough is how the fall of the USSR had a drastically negative effects on the entirety of the working class all over the world. Yeah. And I'll just give you just one example of that. Like all those New Deal reforms that the United States implemented was in direct response to trying to compare themselves to the USSR. Remember, during the Cold War, there was a massive propaganda war between the victors of revolution versus the capitalist class who was revolting against said revolution. So as the USSR was building things, innovating, lifting workers outside of poverty, the United States had to show people that, hey, man, we got a competitive system too. That's where all those reforms came from. All those welfare programs came from, because they wanted to illustrate to the world that we have a functioning working class as well. What happened the second that the USSR fell, my friends? They didn't give a fuck about any of that nonsense anymore. They didn't care about making a strong work. They didn't even care about the illusion of having a strong working class. Instead, they immediately started cutting social programs under Bill Clinton, which greatly exploded the child poverty rate. They implemented policies that destroyed the concept of home ownership, because that is what capitalists we use. Look at all these homeowners that we have. We have people that own their homes too. Then the second that the USSR fell, there was no reason for them to uphold this illusion, this facade that they care about the American working class. That's when you've seen an escalation of the class war. The class war always existed, and maybe you have a different interpretation of this, but once they didn't have someone to compete against, that's when all illusions dropped. That's where the 90s austerity programs were implemented. That's when corporate bailouts were wrapped up to the 10. The fall of the USSR, it has been devastating for the working class all over the world. Well, let's get to a few headlines I'll share before, because this get back to what we were discussing here. Because as there's no longer any like pretext of caring about the working class, you have the capitalist class just straight up rubbing it in our noses. Look, as Zohran Mamdani wins, the first thing Democrats do was pass a resolution condemning socialism. And this was also another resolution that the United States supported. You guys notice that these resolutions, there's always like these core evil states and evil ideology. So In the United States, they condemn socialism. In the United States, they condemn food as a human right. They believe that food should be a human right. Now, you have the United States, Israel, and Argentina, who just had this vote, which exposes the genocidal West. I don't know if you saw it, Jody, but look, out of 178 countries, only the United States, Israel, and Argentina opposed a UN vote against torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. And people wonder why my politics is just generally anti-United States. People are like, Nick, you just anti-America. You just anti-United States. Yeah, I'm kind of anti the state that condemns torture. We have there's the amazing president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, who's been trying to lead a charge to lift the sanctions on Cuba. You had the entire world. I didn't have a savior. I was just thinking about it now. But the entire world condemns the United States embargo on Cuba, except the United States, Israel, and Ukraine. So I thought it was interesting. Jody, do you see this? Do you see how the United States and the West are consistently playing this key role in upholding the genocidal world order? The United States, Israel, and Argentina supporting torture, but the Western left wants you to think that Russia and China is evil, for example. So Cuba, I want to get your thoughts on this, because the Cuban embargo has been hurting. It was a part of the Cold War that we were just discussing, the capitalist class retaliation against revolutions. Why do you think there is this intense focus on to continue to punish Cuba? Jody, what's your thoughts?
For as long as the imperialist system exists, any sovereignty, and especially any socialism, is a massive, massive threat, because for as long as it's there, it's reminding people that there is an alternative, that there is a way out, right? What Cuba represents is humanity's future. And of course, what it represents is the death of the capitalist exploiting ruling class. So it's not surprising that their hostility is permanent and endless and bottomless, and they don't care how many people they starve to bring Cuba to its knees. They have no interest in the life of either Cuban workers or American workers. They have an interest in perpetuating their system, and that means re-exerting their dominance over the world, reasserting it at a time when it's very shaky, right? Underneath this whole drive to war, we've got to recognize what's underpinning the desperation of the war drive right now, and the intensification of the war drive is the deepening of the economic crisis of the capitalist system. Like, there's a lot of commentators who just leave this out of their analysis all the time. And I think without recognizing that that's the broader picture we're looking at, you can't make sense of the war drive. People try to make sense of it in this kind of like, oh, but they want kind of human logical explanations, and they come down to personalities of this person or that person, this leader, that leader, or this class, these type of people. I hear this, like, they have no reverse gear, or they can't admit they're wrong, or they're just obsessed with this thing. No, what's going on is the imperialist system is in a deep global economic crisis. It's teetering on the balance of a massive, massive collapse and meltdown. They're trying to stave it off with money printing, which creates its own problems of endless inflation, right? Which again creates social unrest. This is why they need their controlled opposition on the left and the right. Now that people no longer believe in the mainstream parties, they're sort of outsourcing the left wing of the left and the right wing of the right into new organizations in many, many countries. In America, they've managed to keep those left and right wings still inside the party, but very much as almost distinct entities, right? The DSA is a kind of distinct entity, although it really operates inside the Democratic Party, but it's seen as something sort of fundamentally different. And the same with the kind of Tea Party, Trump bit of the Republican Party. But, all around the world, you see in the imperialist countries, you see that the working class has lost faith and lost trust in the system, and especially in the mainstream political parties left and right. And everywhere you see the right wing of the right, they create a new party. The left wing of the left, they create a new party, and they try to present those as anti-establishment disruptors. What they're really trying to do is keep workers who are beginning to believe that the electoral system doesn't and can't work for them. They're trying to keep them pinned into focusing on elections and changing the personnel of the system, right? People who are beginning to realize that changing the personnel does nothing. That's why I said at the beginning that one admission of Marjorie Taylor Greene's is worth all the rest of the shit, right? Just pull that out and say, yes, this is true. Changing the personnel of the system will not fix anything, won't change the system. They're not the people in charge, even if, you know, my comrade Joti Brar, my father, used to say, you could elect 650 socialists into the Houses of Parliament, you wouldn't have socialism. You can't deliver socialism through, you know, through control of the parliament, because the parliament itself is not where the ruling class operates from. The parliament is there to receive the orders. You've got to dismantle the whole machinery of exploitation, which is very big and extensive, and it becomes more extensive the smaller the ruling class is that's trying to hold on to power over a huge majority of other people. So I've gone off on one. What was the original question?
I was asking about Cuba, but you're spitting. You're teaching us really well, Joti.
I just have to get back round to what I was talking about, and sometimes I lose my way.
No, I'm the same. I get it. I'm loving the education you're giving us this morning, Joti.
Yes, thank you. So Cuba represents a permanent threat to the imperialist ruling class, and they will do everything they can to try to starve the Cuban people into submission. I think what you have to recognize, actually, is while the imperialist sanctions have been successful in making life difficult for Cuba, remember, Cuba is this tiny island. It's a tiny island. And if you really blockade it hard, you're going to make things very difficult for the people, not only because, of course, any country will find it difficult if it can't trade with anybody else, but when you're such a tiny island, it can't possibly be self-sufficient. Cuba can't have its own heavy industry, right, on the basis of this very small island. It has to have trading partners. Now, while the USSR was there, then it had a main trading partner it was able to get all the industrial products it needed via the USSR and the socialist bloc. When European socialism and the USSR fell, that was catastrophic for Cuba. I think what we have to recognize is how incredibly strong the socialist system really is. Look at the DPRK, look at Cuba, look how they've held on to a socialist system despite genocidal sanctions for decades. Coming back to Joseph Stalin, he made a prediction all the way back to the 1930s. He was in an interview with some Western journalist. And the journalist asked him what would happen if the Soviet Union fell. And he said, if the Soviet Union fell, the working and oppressed peoples of the world would be seized by the throat. That was his prediction. And that is exactly, you're right, that's exactly what we saw from 1991. Now, if you think we had it bad in the West, and we have had it bad compared to what we had before, think about what's happened to the people in the rest of the world. Look at the bloodshed. Look at the endless genociding that's ramped up to a whole new level since the fall of the USSR, since the USA and Britain and France and Germany felt that there was no one to get in the way of their rampaging. Immediately as the USSR was falling, the Germany, America and Britain were in the Balkans, weren't they? Inciting war and destroying Yugoslavia. The number of people who died in that war, they still have the cheek to say that until the Ukraine war, Europe was in peace, when they spent a decade drenching Yugoslavia in blood to break it into pieces, right? The wars in the Middle East, again, the Soviet Union hadn't finished, hadn't officially fallen when they launched the first war against Iraq, but they could see it was in the post. Gorbachev was their man. The Soviet Union wasn't going to put up any resistance. And so they felt free to launch this massive ramped up campaign of let's reassert our primacy over the vitally important Middle East, and the Middle East, of course, oil, right? But that campaign to reassert primacy in the Middle East, look at the wave of bloodshed. The Gaza genocide is the latest episode in that But it's been a genocidal 3 decades, has it not? Since 1991, if you're the people of the Middle East, remember Madeleine Albright telling us that 500,000 Iraqi children, being starved to death was a price worth paying, just incidental along the road. This is the reality of the system. We have to recognize how, in fact, what Cuba's resilience as a tiny island right next to the USA, faced by this suffocating, strangulating regime, what does that tell you about socialism? It tells you how strong it is. Right? When you have a planned economy, when you have a mobilized working class, look how much you can withstand. They're still educating all their people for free up to every level. They're still employing their people. They're still producing things. They are still making sure that everybody has free healthcare from the cradle to the grave. They have better life expectancy in Cuba, despite these incredible sanctions that are trying to starve them and strangle them. They have better medicine and better life expectancy than 99% of US workers do, right? So this shows you how incredibly strong socialism is. And the idea, we're supposed to judge socialism by the difficulties that Cuba faces when it's a tiny island being strangled by a massive, all-powerful neighbor. Mm-hmm. What we need to recognize is, look what they've withstood, and they're still there, and they're still not backing down. What does that tell you? That tells you that ultimately the power of a risen people is really indomitable. You see the same when you look at the DPRK. You see the same when you look at Venezuela. Once you mobilize the people and you harness their power and bring it into the state and the productive forces in a meaningful and systematic way, you create something that is 1,000 times stronger than any capitalist society, even an imperialist society with all these advanced weapons. And the other just little point I'd like to make about the balance of forces in the world and what began the tipping point. A lot of people now are looking and talking about the multipolar world order and the rise of Russia and China and how that's starting to stop, the USA in its tracks. And that's absolutely true. But we have to recognize something, which is the beginning of that was the October Revolution in 1917 in Russia, the beginning of there being non-imperialist powers in the world, socialist working class powers in the world, who could outstrip technologically the imperialists. Remember, imperialism is not just a financial power, it's financial power backed up by the most advanced technology, which means the most advanced weapons. And when you go everywhere with all your money and you've got weapons behind your back that says, if you don't accept our financial might, we'll force it on you at the barrel of a gun, and our weapons are much more advanced than yours. It's an unequal contest and you can't stand up to us. That was the basis of imperialist domination of the globe up until 1917. After the October Revolution and the growth of national liberation, but especially after the growth and development of socialist industry and the unleashing of the potential of the Soviet people, what we started to see was that the USSR, if it had stayed on the track it was on, it was starting to overtake the most advanced imperialist powers technologically. And that's the basis still of Russia's ability to stand up for itself. It's the basis of China's ability to stand up for itself, Cuba's, Venezuela's. It's the base of the whole anti-imperialist world's ability to look back at the imperialists and say, no, you can't push us around. But this outstripping, this undermining of the imperialist ability to just go everywhere and dominate with their advanced technology, this is what socialism, this is the power that socialism has given to workers everywhere. And it's what makes socialism such a threat.
Which is why I unapologetically advocate for socialism, and I find people who are afraid to use that word, who are afraid to engage in class war. They say we need to advocate for populism. Your populism without class war, class analysis, without any sort of scientific revolutionary theory is useless. Why you guys think the quote unquote populist failed thus far? Like, we have two distinct choices for the society: socialism or fascism. The capitalist class is going to do everything they can to steer us to fascism, and I understand, and I think there's legitimate arguments to be made that we're already there. But it'll be the last thing I'll share for today. I want your thoughts on this. This has been an amazing theory-based 1 hour show, a Marxist power hour we had this morning. So It was great to have you on, Jody. I'm going to get to my quick segment. This segment not be too long. We're going to discuss the collapse of the U.S. labor market that the United States media is completely hiding. I know multiple people in my personal life who've been laid off. I know people in my personal life that are going through it, and it's very heartbreaking. Like, if you guys see me screaming, melting down on stream, if you see me melting down on the timeline, it's because I'm a real American who's feeling the real pains of our failed system. Like, this is a working class channel. Like, we're not. I'm not millionaires like TYT and others. I have family members who are struggling. I don't have healthcare, and I haven't had healthcare for like 7 years, ever since I stopped selling cars. And one of the jobs I had a long time ago, before I started selling cars, is a job that I would have done for 25, 30 years. You guys would have never heard of me if we had a coherent system, because I took pride in my labor. I used to have this job where I was building printer cartridges. And you guys see why I was laid off, though, because there's not a lot of need for people who build printer cartridges anymore. But I used to love working my hands, man. My dad's a mechanic. My dad was a mechanic. I love working my hands. I would have been 100% okay with finding an industrial job where I build things for our society, and just make a decent money. I don't need to be rich. Just make decent money. Maybe I'll invest into a house, raise a family. That's all I wanted out of the society, and we was robbed of it. Like, I look around at jobs now. Like, a few years ago, you guys know we make a lot of financial sacrifices at RBN. I'm not gonna lie and tell you guys about maybe 3 years ago. I thought about quitting doing this shit before. I'm like, man, I'm struggling. Let me find a factory job. Guys, it doesn't exist. The job that was available just when I left high school, it wasn't good back then. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't good in 2010. But even the jobs that was available in 2010, they are gone now. Like, people don't understand, the capitalist class, they have no plan to dig us out of this hole that we are in. We are in a gigantic AI bubble. Our entire economy is fake and propped up by Wall Street corruption. And now you have people being laid off all around the country. There's no, and we are in a position right now. I seen this segment that wasn't even worth covering. I saw it on CNN where they were like, man, if you get a job now, you better hold on to it. And it was all chuckling. Yeah, you better hold on to that job. All the millionaires on the panel laughing at the plight of the American working class. So my healthcare, I see someone say you better get healthcare. Fam, my healthcare plan is to eat an apple and box 2 or 3 times a day, try to stay healthy, which I'm still very, very healthy. Thank God I'm young, man. When I get older, I'm fleeing. I'm gonna move to, if I can't accomplish healthcare in the United States, I'll have to flee somewhere else, because I see people with medical bankruptcies, people who are being laid off left and right. And this is why I'm furious when I see people obsessed with the political theater, the millionaires talking about how amazing it was to see Zohran Mamdani and Trump get along in the White House, like Cenk Uygur. Let me show you guys a few receipts, and Jody, I want to get you in. This will be our final segment of the day. Layoff notices across the United States are rising at a recessionary pace. You have Nebraska, and you have this local economy in Nebraska that's going to be completely destroyed. Tyson Foods, a corrupt, capitalist, piece of shit company in a nutshell. Like, I don't have time to explain it all, but their labor practices, the way they treat their animals, for example, for meat, like, they are an example of capitalist rot at the highest level. Tyson Food, but there was a giant employer in Nebraska. Now they have major plants that are closing, massive layoffs. Look, I'll just read this headline, and there's so many headlines like these spreading all over the country right now, but the media is doing everything they can to distract you for it. Hey, don't you know that Marjorie Taylor Greene quit Congress because Donald Trump said a few mean things about her? Don't focus on the economy that's collapsing. You have a record amount of Americans that are going through medical debt right now. You guys know that? You guys know that there's a record amount of Americans that have credit card debt? Another damning statistic that shows that our economy is screwed, that there is a record amount of Americans who are upside down on their car, who can't afford car loans, people can't afford to rent. Fam, whenever you see people talk about economy, like, man, don't you know our GDP growth, our GDP rates? Nonsense. None of that has anything to do with you. But let me read this tweet. You see jobs are falling off the cliff. Workers are in debt. I'm going to see if I can find this article. I didn't have it saved. There's an article I read not too long ago that explained how the American working class is drowning into debt. I might have to find it quickly. How the American working class. Oh, here it is. I don't know if this is the same exact article, but this is what I'm referencing. Look. Yeah, this is not the exact same article, but you see, most workers are drowning in debt. Communists, we're all about ending the debt of the American working class while the capitalists keep you enslaved. And look at this one. Last one I'll read, and Jody, I want to get your thoughts on this. Collapsing neoliberal empire. And guys, they're going to steal, they're going to rob everything and suck this country dry, and they're going to flee. They don't have a plan for you. United States layoffs are running at crisis pace. Crisis pace. Companies announced 153,000 jobs was cut in October, nearly tripling the number from 2024. It was the worst October for layoffs in 22 years. The AI bubble is going to burst, and people need to start planning what they're going to do. And there's a reason why we are pushing hard for mutual aid. There's a big reason why we're pushing hard for socialism, because there needed to be a plan to counteract the real pain that the American people are about to feel. So, Jody, this will be the last topic we cover. I want your thoughts, just in general, about the collapse that we predicted. Like, if you read scientific socialists like Jody, it doesn't surprise her. It doesn't surprise us. It's just how should socialists react in these kind of times, Jody? Any final thoughts on this segment? Anything you want to add in terms of what the American people, how they should respond to these economic crises that we're seeing?
Definitely. Well, the first thing is, thanks, Nick, is to recognize that this is how the system works. And to really understand that, you need to study Marxism. And I suggest that people do study Marxism. If you come to my party's website, for example, which is thecommunists.org, we've got a Marxist study program there that you can work your way through. And of course, at the same time as studying, you need to get organized and get active in a communist party. But you have to do it knowing what you're trying to achieve. You've got, like, running around being an activist like a headless chicken. There's no point to that. You have to have a program. You have to have an organization. Your program has to be aimed at raising the consciousness of the working class and popularizing a Marxist understanding amongst the masses. That's what's needed, because it's not individual activists who are going to fix things. It's the working class in motion, having understood that what it needs to do is bring down this system and build a new one. And it needs a party to help it do that. But the party won't do it by itself. The party has to connect this science with the masses. So having said that, I just want to make a couple of points about what you were saying. You've pointed to indications of what I was talking about earlier, which is the deep and deepening economic global crisis, okay, of the capitalist system. And one of the things to understand when you're looking at all these layoffs is this is all part of the process that's been ongoing for a long time. In Britain, as the oldest industrial capitalist country, we are also the earliest country to begin this process, and therefore the furthest along. And that's the process of what people today are calling deindustrialization, but what Lenin pinpointed as the export of capital. So in the imperialist era, in the era of monopoly capital, what happens is the capitalists, in order to keep profit rates high in a situation where they've impoverished their own workers, right, to the point where the workers can't buy back the goods they're making. So they need to expand their markets. But then what they discover is just selling goods to the rest of the world doesn't make you as much money as if you move production to other parts of the world. Then, because the land is cheaper, the raw materials are cheaper, the laborers are cheaper, there's fewer regulations, etc., you make super profits. And then you bring back those super profits to the home country, use them to buy a bit of social peace, and do the whole thing again, right? That's what the system of imperialism actually is. It's an economic global system of monopoly capital, right? It's not the foreign policy of this or that government. It's a global economic system. And if you read Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, you can really understand that a lot better. But so when we look at the overproduction crisis, which is what it is that we have right now in the world, and all of the symptoms of that, we're seeing like the asset bubble, like accelerated export of capital to where more profit can be made because wages are lower. The plan that the ruling class has is war for loot, right? If you look at the last time the imperialists were in a quite an economic hole, it was the end of the 1980s. If you look back to that era, you'll remember there was a lot of attacks on the working class. So there was a lot of resistance from the working class, but there was a lot of rising unemployment. There was rising deindustrialization. There were big social problems. And how did the ruling class get out of it that time? Luckily for them, the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe fell, and they had a bonanza of looting. But because the Soviet Union, which was the bastion of socialism, had fallen and the working class movement was demoralized and disorganized, that looting benefited a tiny proportion of society. And at the same time they were looting around the world and giving their system a massive shot in the arm, the imperialists were also, as you said, Nick, they were cracking down on the working class at home. They were pushing down wages, pay, conditions, cutting back services, and that has been continuing ever since. And so the two strategies that the ruling class employs in times of crisis as now is more austerity, accelerate the process of pushing down the conditions of the workers at home. So the massive workers are losing everything they gained in the post-war period and becoming much more like, or being pushed down towards the level of the poorest workers anywhere else in the world, right? Reharmonize the position of the majority of proletarians in the imperialist countries to the level of proletarians anywhere else in the world. That's part of the strategy. Push down on all the social provision that takes away from profitability, right? And on the other side, it's war. Conquer or reconquer liberated territories and loot them, rather than having to buy things from them, right? And market prices. That's not how you make maximum profit. And at this time of, deep economic crisis, it's a massive orgy of looting is what the imperialists need. And of course, what they also desperately need is for China as a socialist country and as the main pillar of the world anti-imperialist movement and the main example to workers everywhere that they don't have to just stick with what they've got. They need to bring China down. Particularly, they want to loot China, but they also need to get rid of, like we said with Cuba earlier, right? They need to get rid of that example. So this drive to war is an existential one. It's not that you can rationally persuade the imperialists not to make war. They have to make war to try to resolve their crisis. And if they are victorious, they'll be back in this situation in 10 or 20 years' time, right? So even if you sat on the side and said, oh, well, to rebalance our lives and make the system work again, maybe it's okay for them to win the Third World War, right? And, then we'll have peace for a bit if we just leave them to it. But we won't. The workers will never have peace under this system. What we have to remember is that war and inequality, poverty, these are all results of capitalism and capitalist imperialism. And let's come back to, you were asking about the Soviet Union. Let's just come back to that again. What did it do? It abolished hunger. It abolished homelessness. It abolished poverty. It abolished unemployment. All these things which are now coming back, even for workers in the richest countries who thought that they'd got rid of those things. It turns out you were just getting a bribe to stop you making the revolution at a time when the revolutionary sentiments and consciousness of workers was high. Your movement was bought off at a time when it was a powerful movement. Now you've got to build it all again. But the truth is, there's no way around it. We've got to build it all again. And just to wrap up and come back to what you were saying there earlier, Nick, what were the jobs you said made you feel like your life had meaning? Socially necessary work. Now, one thing in a socialist country, a real socialist planned economy like the Soviet Union in the Stalin era was, every single job is socially necessary. It's a job that has meaning. It's a job that has dignity. It's a job that comes with full respect. where you have a guaranteed to a decent home, where you're guaranteed healthcare and education and leisure time and culture and a social life. You are guaranteed all these things, a life of respect and dignity as a working person, and every bit of work that every person does, and every person has a job who is able to work, everyone has a job, and every single bit of work is socially useful and necessary. Now, most of us living in the West can hardly imagine actually what that would be like, to live where not only you can have work that's fulfilling for yourself, but everybody you know has work that's fulfilling for them, where you don't have to feel guilty about stepping over a homeless person sleeping in a doorway, or explain to your children why they have things that other people don't have, right? All of that gone, where there's none of this fighting of nation against nation and person against person, men against women, black against white, whatever. None of this crap is necessary. It's all overcome. It's all those type of things are an obstruction to building a planned socialist economy. And so they got rid of and overcome very quickly and very easily as soon as you start giving people decent conditions in which to live and work together.
What an amazing lecture at the end. I love how much you taught us today, Jody. Thank you for your time. An intellectual powerhouse as always. And it's actually very inspiring, you know what I mean? Because I've been doing this for about 5 years now, and I always try to grow as a revolutionary and as a teacher. So to see your breadth of knowledge in real time, it actually inspired me. It made me want to double up my reading, you know what I mean? I think we all should be striving to be better revolutionaries. I'm not a liberal, guys. I believe we all have personal responsibility for our fate, and I think even though we have a lot we got to fight against, we should be pushing to be better, to be smarter, to be wiser. Don't buy into the nihilist left. We have power, and let's begin to grow. Jody, thank you for joining us. I'm going to just read a few super chats I saw. I don't want to leave you guys hanging. Thank you, Global Citizen, for the $5. It's good. It feels good because I've started this channel, my new personal channel, because this is a Nick Cruse exclusive today. And it's good to see that we still have RBN supporters that follow to this new channel who watch it on the other platforms as well. Thank you, Global Citizen. I think that's supposed to be. I think you guys should get together more often. Yeah, we love Jody. Oh, by the way, we started doing these weekend shows because I was doing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the evening. That's what my program has been for like the last few months. Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the evening. The problem with doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern time is I never had time to talk to our international brothers and sisters anymore. Like I had a ton of people from China. You guys remember earlier this year, I had a ton of people from China, had a ton of people from Moscow. The only problem with moving to Nick at prime time is I don't have access to those people anymore. So we decided to do these special weekend shows because we had to have Jody on. So Jody is in the UK, so we're gonna do these shows on the weekend every once in a while where we have our international guests on. And Zoya, you guys know Zoya's been in the lab cooking. We got a lot of great guests on the international stage that will be joining us. So these weekend shows will be on the regular. I appreciate you guys supporting my labor because I am putting extra work on a Sunday, but we had to because Jody is bringing a lot of education to us. So look forward to these shows. These that I will be doing on the weekend. It's going to be more of an international conversation on these Sunday and Saturday shows. Thank you, Willie, for your $5 and for your super chat. And thank everyone for watching and supporting the stream. This is the website that you linked earlier before. Jody, I give you opportunity. Anything else you want to shout out? Anything else you want to plug before we wrap up your stream? It was great hearing your insights once again, my friend.
Thank you, Nick. It's really nice to be with you, and I really appreciate the work that you're putting in our joint struggle. So just to let people know, if they don't already, that I have a Telegram channel. It's just my name on Telegram, and my party has one also, the Communists with an S. And also we have a YouTube channel, which is called Proletarian TV. And I recommend that to people and have a good hunt around, because if you go back through the archives, there's some phenomenal stuff on all kinds of subjects there. So really useful learning platform.
So this is her. I didn't know you had a channel. That's crazy. That's how you know YouTube. I did not know that Jody had a YouTube channel. That's great. But anyway, make sure you guys subscribe. Make sure you guys check out Jody. Who's my guest tomorrow? We have a banner guest. Zoe, I'm blanking. Let me pull the schedule real quick. Isn't who we have? We have so many guests. I'm blanking. Who's tomorrow? Oh, Sean McCarthy. Sean McCarthy joins us tomorrow. Great anti-imperialist writer. We have Thomas Fozzie join us on Friday. So Zoya's been in lab cooking. We got a lot of great guests. It was great to hear from you, Jody. Enjoy the rest of your guys' weekend. Hope you guys enjoy the stream.